They always worked for themselves. They always built businesses. And so I think just seeing the way that my parents lived their lives and really went against the grain of what was normal. They were kind of the original digital nomads before it was a thing. And a lot of people kind of questioned what the heck they were doing. I think you have to make those decisions quickly and realize when the writing's on the wall. To be completely honest with you, there's so many founders who I adore, who I think are, working on ideas that are never going to take flight. We see a lot of stories like that in the platform. One that I didn't expect was a dad who reached out to me because he was building a business with his daughter, and he was using Blanka as a way to show his daughter the fundamentals about businesses and how to start a business.
Welcome to Be Anomalous. I'm Sai Menon, and today's guest is Kaylee Lieffers. Kaylee is someone I truly admire. She's the founder of Blanka. Blanka is a beauty tech platform that helps people start and run their own beauty and wellness brands without needing to manufacture products themselves or carry inventory. She helped tens of thousands of entrepreneurs launch beauty and wellness brands without the usual barriers around inventory, manufacturing, or logistics. She's been recognized as a top 30 under 30 entrepreneur in Canada, raised an oversubscribed seed round, and built real infrastructure for founders who didn't have access before. In this episode, we talk about how she thinks about growth, leadership, and responsibility, what it takes to build something that lasts, and how to make decisions when a lot of people are counting on you. This is a conversation about building at scale while staying grounded in who you are. If you're a founder, a creator, or someone thinking seriously about what you're building, this episode is for you. So let's get into it.
Before we dive into what you're doing currently and about Blanka, I want to go back to your childhood and your upbringing. Did you always know that you were going to be an entrepreneur?
Wow, you diving right in. I love it. So I guess a little bit about myself. I am Canadian. I'm from Saskatchewan, but I grew up in Mexico. So when I was 8 or so, my parents kind of up and decided to live a more international life. And so I think that kind of set the framework for just my adaptability, just in terms of how I was raised. Both my parents are very entrepreneurial. They always worked for themselves. They always built businesses. And so I think just seeing the way that my parents lived their lives and really went against the grain of what was normal. They were kind of the original digital nomads before it was a thing. And a lot of people kind of questioned what the heck they were doing. And so I think that concept of living against the grain very often is an entrepreneurial way of life and a way of thinking. And so that's how I was raised. And I think it's kind of by osmosis taken its life inside of me as well. I think where I struggled with the concept of entrepreneurialism was in my more formative university years. I went to UBC in Vancouver, and I was in a business program that was like fairly regimented, right? They really pushed you into accounting, finance, or marketing. Mm-hmm. There were other options, but those ones weren't promoted as much. They weren't as popular. The school didn't provide as much resources against it. And so you were kind of pushed into a non-entrepreneurial career path. Yeah. And so that kind of fought my upbringing and what I was interested in. But at the same time, I sometimes questioned whether or not I had good ideas and if I was an entrepreneur. So I don't think for me it was a super linear decision to, start a company. It was something that I always wanted to do, but I questioned myself. But I think deep down, there was definitely roots and I had the blood for it, just in terms of how I was raised. So that's a bit of a mixed answer, but it's kind of how I think about how I was raised and, some of the more influential moments, even in my university career, that kind of impacted the route that I took.
That's very interesting that you bring up, because I did entrepreneurship in business, and every time I mention that to anyone, they go like, entrepreneurship cannot be taught. And now there's this whole debate about should that even be a course? So based off of what you just said, what do you think? You think that can it be taught?
I think that entrepreneurship can be incubated. And what I mean by that is there's some really great courses in different schools. I mean, Stanford has the the D school and Sauder, where I went, they had new ventures design. And in new ventures design, you would get paired up with, it'd be 2 business students, 2 engineering students, and you'd incubate an idea. And then through the course of the semester, you'd essentially bring it to life. And some of those people went on to, build out those concepts into full-fledged businesses. So, I do think there's elements of entrepreneurship that can be taught, or like I said, incubated if it's already there. And I think that there's like true business learnings and frameworks that are super important when you're starting a company, whether that's like thinking about marketing or reading a P&L or even how you build a team. There are best practices that you can pull that you're not just going to make up out of thin air.
Yeah. So I think what you're trying to say, like going back to your business education really helped you with what you're doing right now. But at the same time, I think your parents brought out that entrepreneurship within you, right?
Yeah, I think that's super true. And I'd say in some ways, even the job experiences I got early on in my career helped with that, even if they didn't seem as directly tied to entrepreneurship. So when I graduated from university, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was super curious. And so naturally, I went into consulting, which kind of allowed me to continue to dig into a lot of different industries and companies. And it was very corporate, right? We were building decks and building financial models. And so a lot of that doesn't necessarily apply to a more startup environment. But then again, a lot of it does. And I think being able to think logically with frameworks and break down problems really serves people in startups when everything feels like it's scattered and thrown against the wall. You have to be able to kind of make connections and be logical and thoughtful about how you're going to tackle these problems and then prioritize. So I think that there was a lot of really powerful learnings from a corporate career that have been very valuable in my startup career. And, if I could give advice to anybody, it would be to, test the waters in a corporate environment, because you're going to get really, really good training, which you might not necessarily get in a startup.
Yeah, that's a very when you look at entrepreneurs, that's one of the traditional paths that I've seen where people like shift from consulting to entrepreneurship. And I think everyone kind of says that because consulting is so much. So I think going back to seeing, like you said that your parents were entrepreneurs. Did you see in front of you like the failures and ups and downs of entrepreneurship and how hard it is? Is it the same as watching your parents versus when you were doing it by yourself? How has that kind of changed, or how has that impacted you?
Totally. I mean, yeah, I've definitely seen the ups and downs. And I think as an adult now who like my parents see as a peer in a lot of ways, like we're friends now, we're a lot more vocal about what those things are. And even today, my mom was an artist, right? So she used to run her own interior design company, and now she's focused on paint and doing commissions for folks all over the world. She's really talented, but she's constantly thinking about how to get her name out there and marketing and closing deals. And it's really cool because it's very different, but then there's so many overlaps as well. And so we can jam on different ideas. And she's definitely not like the full business oriented person. So it takes her a while to really understand maybe concepts that feel so comfortable to me. So yeah, I think we've been able to have really good, honest conversations. And at the same time, they've taken such a deep interest in Blanka and in what I'm building, and they've cheered us on. And I think, because they are so entrepreneurial, they never questioned, oh, why are you quitting your corporate job for this? They've always just been so supportive and, reposting when we have articles and celebrating our awards. And so that's been really special. So yeah, I think it's really cool though. I think just like the nature of your relationship with your parents does change as you get older and you look at each other in a different lens. And that's so true of our relationship broadly speaking, but also because we both are, or all three of us, my dad too, we're all in business or running businesses. We have this new kind of arena of conversation that we can have amongst each other.
Oh, yeah, that was going to be my next question. Like, were your parents supportive? I think one of the major things that people don't have is when their parents kind of question them why you like quitting your corporate job. So your parents were really supportive, and I think that comes from the fact that they were entrepreneurs.
100%. They're so supportive. They're so excited. My mom is so funny because my mom's built up quite a big Instagram following for her
Oh
art.
wow,
And
nice.
it's so impressive. My mom, the influencer. But she's always reposting Blanka. And
Oh,
recently
that's
she's
nice.
like, oh, this lady on my Instagram is reaching out, wanting to learn more about Blanka. Like, should I tell her to reach out to you? So she's like becoming lead gen for us. Not
Oh,
actually, but it was
nice.
just one example. But yeah, they're incredibly supportive.
Yeah, I think that's really meaningful for someone who wants to start their company. I think that it's like that's the most essential thing. So um I think going from there, how did you kind of get into Blanca? Before that, I know you were trying to start your own another. You were working on another company, and then you came into Blanca. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit about how that journey came to be?
Yeah, for sure. So after a few years in consulting, I kind of started to realize that the corporate world probably wasn't going to be the long game for me. I didn't want to plan out my life in different promotions that I was going to get. And I felt like I was very much at the whim of the projects that I got placed on versus having true control over working on projects that I cared about. And so I decided to dip my toes in the startup ecosystem. And I worked for a number of really cool startups. I was also part of the founding team of a company called Mob Squad out of Calgary, and really just fell in love with startups and building and really like truly building from 0 to 1. I find super exciting. And interestingly, a lot of the work that I did kind of fell into commerce enablement, marketplaces. So really fell in love with commerce without even intentionally seeking it out. And through that process, learned so much about the industry, got to see e-commerce through a bunch of different cycles, like what was happening through COVID, for example. At the
Mhm.
same time, on a more personal level, I've always had a very active lifestyle. I've always been super passionate about, personal care and really interested in beauty. And so a few years ago, decided to kind of amalgamate that professional startup experience in the world of commerce with a personal passion for beauty and wellness, and set out to launch a sunscreen line. And through that process, just learned how challenging it is to source suppliers and make sure samples are compliant and order inventory and deal with fulfillment. Getting a product line off the ground looked easy from the outside, but I realized that it's super obstacle ridden, very costly, very time consuming. And so through that process, was really where we kind of stumbled across the idea of, hey, what if we build a platform that's really enabling this new wave of product developers and new wave of entrepreneurs essentially in the D2C world. And so that's how Blanka was born, really was to solve the problem that I experienced when trying to launch my own sunscreen line.
So how did you kind of move away from like building your sunscreen line to actually moving into because uh, I mean making that commitment and then kind of moving away from that and deciding that that's not the right startup venture for me right now. How do you kind of move away from that?
I think you have to make those decisions quickly and realize when the writing's
Yeah.
on the wall. To be completely honest with you, there's so many founders who I adore who I think are, you know, working on ideas that are never going to take flight, and they've been doing
Yeah.
it for years. And so I think if anything, being able to move on quickly was the right decision. And so that for me wasn't challenging. For us, it was like, getting this new concept off the ground. And so my husband is one of my co-founders, and we always were going to build something together because we have very complementary skill sets. He comes from a marketing and design background. I came from more of a finance, corporate strategy background. And so the piece of the puzzle that we were missing was the technical side. And so we looped in one of our really close friends, who's also a former colleague of Adam's, also colleague of mine. So we just had really deep connections. And so the three of us decided to build an MVP for what is now Blanka. And we spent a few months conceptualizing it, over engineering it from, a product feature perspective. And then eventually getting it to like a really solid MVP that we released in 2021.
Amazing. So you kind of went through the whole building your team and finding the right co-founders, but were they your co-founders for the previous startup, like for your sunscreen, or it was just specifically for Blanka that you felt like they are the right people?
Just for Blanka, it was net new. And it's so interesting. We have such a good working relationship and we get each other so well. I think we were very fortunate to have figured out the co-founder relationship early on, whereas I know a lot of other startups struggle with that. We have our own struggles in different areas of the business for sure, but this is one where I'm like, no, we've nailed this. And we all have this like crazy shared passion and shared vision and shared drive to continue building. And it's been, almost 4 years now, which is crazy. And that still remains consistent between all three of us. And so I think we've been really lucky with our co-founder journey, but I know that that's not necessarily the case with other startups. That being said, I cannot imagine ever building a company of any size without having co-founders and that support system.
So what advice would you have for someone who's like looking for co-founders? What are the green flag and red flag in those situations, kind of, making sure that they are the right partner for you?
I think it's that concept of like hiring slow, firing fast. Not that you're going to fire your co-founder, but you need to move really slow if you don't have one right out the gates. And so this isn't like going to a meetup and finding the first technical co-founder that's available. I think the most successful kind of scenarios I've seen is when somebody like a founder is looking for a co-founder where they offer them maybe a contract role or a head of role with some equity as a testing ground to make sure they're the right fit before bringing them on in a co-founder capacity. So I'd say start slow, really test the waters and make sure that they're the right fit. Because I think that you have to have like shared passion and shared vision for what you're building. But also like you have to be able and willing to put in, I think, the same amount of grind or have the same idea of like what that looks like. Because some companies are, building lifestyle companies versus some like us, we're building venture-backed, very scalable businesses. And so the pace that you're building at is different depending on that. So you all need to be on the same page and you all have to be willing to message each other at midnight when something goes wrong or stay up through the night. And so the right co-founder will be at your side through all of that. And the wrong one definitely isn't willing to put in the time or the effort.
Yeah. I think those are one of the main reasons for startups to fail is co-founders not kind of working out. So yeah, you got really lucky. And one is your husband. So how is that, like working with your husband in building a startup?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, for us, it's just not something that really defines our co-founder dynamic. It's a factor or a trait, but I think sometimes we and even the team forget about that like secondary relationship. I think it helps that there's three of us. And so that is like very much a balance of the co-founder dynamic. I think with Adam and I, the biggest thing we need to think about isn't on like, how does the co-founder relationship work, but how does the marriage work on the background and making sure, we're carving out time just for ourselves and like creating boundaries between work and not work, because otherwise it completely bleeds in. And so far we're 4 years in and the business is stronger than it's ever been and Adam and I are stronger than it's ever been. So I think we figured something out there. And I think it's just like also a lot of mutual respect for each other in a business environment. We know who's responsible for what. I know what he's amazing at and what I'm not amazing at and vice versa. And so there's a lot of respect amongst the three of us and especially amongst Adam and I to really encourage each other to own our domains. But at the end of the day, like I am CEO and sometimes I do have to make final decisions and make the final call. And so when it comes to that, Doug and Adam are also super respectful of that and Adam especially. And so I think we've just built that from day one and had really honest conversations. Like we'd have honest conversations about equity, about decision, about board composition. And so by having those awkward conversations at the beginning, I think it set us up for success.
So how did you go about fundraising? I know you bootstrapped for a while. Why did you decide to bootstrap? And you spoke about equity. So how did you kind of go about that? Like someone who, especially beauty brands, getting into Blanka, how do they go about like when to decide bootstrapping versus fundraising? What has been your journey?
I think my journey's been really interesting, or our journey's been really interesting for a few reasons. It's like, first of all, when we started the company in 2021, there was a lot of available capital. And so we had a lot of inbounds from investors and folks that were interested in what we were building, but we didn't take it. And we didn't take it largely because we still had to build traction and we still had to get to a place where the company was, truly in a bit of a rhythm. And I didn't feel comfortable taking capital at a pre-seed stage where we truly didn't know what we were building at that point. And so that was more of just like, I don't know if it was a pride or it was just like a philosophy that I had. And so we decided to hold off, and it was the best decision that we ever made. We got traction. We built the business up. We started to really understand what the levers are of the company so that, when we started to hit a ceiling and we needed more capital, we knew where that capital needed to be deployed versus just like at a pre-seed stage, you're kind of just throwing it everywhere. And so for Blanka and for our team, it was the right decision. But once we started feeling that ceiling of being like, okay, we could grow faster and we could grow a lot more if we had capital, that was kind of the light bulb moment where we realized we needed to bring on capital. And that was in the summer of 22. And so basically spent the better part of the next 6 months figuring out like what a fundraising strategy looks like. Didn't fundraise at that time, but was having conversations. And we got into an accelerator with Forum Ventures, and they're focused on B2B SaaS. And really their accelerator is very much oriented towards helping founders raise a successful round, either a pre-seed or a seed round. And so that was really the catalyst for us setting up a successful fundraise in what kicked off in Feb of 23. So there's a lot of like back work leading up to the fundraise, and happy to talk about that and happy to talk about the dynamics of the fundraise itself. But in terms of, what really was the driver between not to bootstrap and then to eventually raise, I think it was just making sure the company was in the right place at the right time. Funny enough, if we had raised in 21 versus 23, the markets were very different.
But you still stand by your decision, right?
100%. And we had an oversubscribed seed round even in bad markets, and we have an incredible cap table. And so I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah. I did see that. Congrats on the oversubscribed fundraising round. Before we go into what Blanka is, you spoke a little bit about your childhood. What has been your relationship with beauty brands? And now that you're working with so many beauty brands and in the beauty industry, how has that like shaped your identity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think for me, I have a lot of stronger attraction to like skincare and hair care than necessarily makeup. This is a funny story, but as a kid, my mom used to I have a little sister as well, and my mom would dress us both up and put makeup on both of us like we were her human dolls. I kid you not. And I think I have a bit of trauma from that. I never liked it. So I've never been a big makeup gal, but love skincare, love that kind of like treat yourself mindset, good hair care routine, and just feeling great. And I'm really big into exercise and an active lifestyle, so everything that comes with it. And so I think I don't know if, my role at Blanka has evolved because of like the products that we interact with or the brands that we interact with. But I definitely think like those are kind of like the products that I'm more excited about when we are trying out new samples or finding a new vendor, a new supplier. And then on the flip side of that, when I see a merchant, which is our customer, build a brand through Blanka that's really successful, it truly comes back to like them building a successful brand around a really strong narrative and really high quality products. And those are all the things that I purchase for when I'm buying from a brand itself. So it's interesting to see some of these brands really take flight based on just some really small core principles that matter, which is like I said, that narrative and high quality products. And so, yeah, I don't know, a bit of a broad answer, I suppose, to that question, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. So are you the one who's testing the products?
Definitely not anymore. That used to be my role amongst like 30 other roles, but no, we have a merchandiser now, who we spend a lot of time testing the products internally and then testing with some of our specific partners and with our merchants and sending out samples and making sure the ingredients are right. Like there's a very, very long checklist of product vetting. And it's something that I'm really proud of because, you know, our platform's two-sided. It's technology and it has to be incredible, you know, bug-free, seamless technology, but it also has to be really amazing products because essentially somebody comes on and chooses products and brands them and sells them. And so we need to, you know, win on both sides of that in order to have a successful company. And the product piece is something that's really hard to dial. And we've really figured it out. Like the products are amazing. They're super high quality. They're all sourced from North America. I love them. And so I wish I was still sampling them, but that's not my job anymore.
Oh, so yeah. So can you give like a one-line elevator pitch for what Blanka is and why people should use it?
Yeah, for sure. So Blanka is essentially a one-stop shop for anybody to launch their own branded beauty, skincare, or makeup line. Everything's customized, everything's super high quality, and there's no minimums. And so it takes less than 5 minutes to get started, and anyone can start their own business.
I saw that Blanka is probably one of the few ones who has no minimum order quantity, and that was something that you really, it was your decision. Why do you stick by that rule?
I think part of that came from this idea of we're here to enable entrepreneurship and really, you know, the same way that Shopify armed the rebels and helped the mom and pops get off the ground. That was something that was so important to us as well. And so in that same light, having really high minimums didn't make sense because then new entrepreneurs would have to spend thousands of dollars to get their businesses started. And that was very counterintuitive to what we were trying to build. And so it was absolutely necessary that we had no minimums on the platform.
So how did you kind of work with the vendors to get to that point, or how do you make that possible, like from a business standpoint?
Yeah, I think economies of scale really help. We have a large number of merchants. We've done a really great job in the way we negotiate with our vendors. And so it's a multitude of variables over time that have helped us kind of get to that spot. But it definitely took a while. It didn't happen overnight.
Yeah. How did you find, so when you started Blanka, what was the first thing that you needed to, I think the partnerships, the vendors, correct me if I'm wrong. And then I think the product part of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the first couple things that I was really focused on while Doug was building up the tech was making sure we had like the partnerships and the vendors set up. We had to think operationally how the business works, but honestly, you don't really know until things are actually flowing. And, you know, we were fulfilling out of our living room in Vancouver for a long time, and now things have changed drastically. But you grow into bigger processes, bigger optimizations. The other thing that I was really focused on was like building up a group of customers and speaking to as many customers as possible before we actually launched Blanka. And so I created a private Facebook group and invited anybody in the beauty and cosmetics world and just tried to chat with as many people as possible to learn as much as I could. So spent a lot of time just talking to customers and understanding like, what do they want if this type of platform existed, and that helps steer the ship in terms of like a few of the major features that we decided we didn't need to launch with, or we decided we did need to launch with.
So sort of like a customer validation that you were kind of doing it in your own way.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. How long did you do that before you actually launched?
About 2.5 months, because the same amount of time that like Doug was building the platform as well.
Okay. And what did you learn from that? Did that give you the validation, or like it was sort of like, oh yes, this is a problem that I have been facing and everyone else is also facing it?
Yeah, I think it validated the fact that like we were on the right track in terms of low minimums, high quality products. I think it opened our eyes to how many other product categories we could probably launch over time. And then the other thing I think it helped us realize is that people really cared about seeing their logo on products and this concept of like visualizing what their brand looks like. And that was an interesting learning because we didn't really have that built into the app because that required a lot of tech. And so we were able to build that over time. But I think that there's this like emotional connection, of course, and it makes sense that a brand has when they see a product with their logo on it. And so we really needed to double click into that and build out functionality to demonstrate, hey, this is what your product line is going to look like when you're all said and done. And so those were really big learnings that we had kind of early on, even post launch, and some additional features we had to eventually build out.
So in terms of like going for fundraising, you said I did read about your playbook, and one of the things that you had mentioned was sending out investor newsletters, and I thought that was so interesting. So yeah, tell me a little bit about that. How did you come to make that list of investors, and what made you do that?
Yeah, so our first investor list, I think, had 6 individuals on it, and it now has over 400. So it's a massive list, and it's grown over time. And I think a couple things, the reason why we built it is there's a bit of accountability piece. We knew that, starting to communicate with investors before fundraising, we kicked this process off probably 5 months before we even ran our fundraising cycle. And so building a bit of accountability and consistency with these email updates helped kind of introduce ourselves to some folks. And usually I get those emails just by intro calls or an intro meeting, or even running into somebody at a conference, for example. I'd be like, hey, if you're okay with that, I'd love to add you to our updates. And so keeping it really casual, and our updates are super casual. But I think what that portrays to investors is like, okay, this company is really serious. They're on top of it. They are accountable to what they're reporting. And so by the time we did kick off fundraising, one of the investors who was on our update list was like, yeah, I'm in. I've been following you guys. Count me in. And so that was a really cool experience. And I think it just speaks to the power of like this communication and that consistency. And so I definitely encourage founders to do it. Some founders do it quarterly. I don't feel like that's enough. I prefer to do it monthly, keep the updates really short. I always have an ask at the bottom of the update so that, I can essentially ask 400 people for help with something. And so they're a really powerful tool for us.
And are they responsive?
Oh yeah. For one, last year I wanted to get introduced to a really big social media platform, so a few executives there. And I put the ask out in my investment update. I was like, hey, does anybody have an introduction in this company? And within a week, I was at like a private dinner with that company.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it's a really powerful tool.
That's amazing. So I think you've been like cold emailing people and building your relationship, even with your vendors, right?
So I've never been a big cold email gal. For investors, it just doesn't work. And so I never went that route. Definitely with some vendors early stage, there were folks that we reached out to, but now a lot of vendors you can't even find online. You have to go to trade shows, or they inbound to us because you would never find them on Google. And so cold email's never been a really big thing for us, but I know it's been big for other companies.
Yeah. So how did you build like your vendors? It's like just for trade shows, you would just go to these trade shows when you wanted to like get these products and then test them out?
Yeah, exactly. And I think as we started to build our brand equity, they started to reach out to us, and also recommendations from other people in the industry. There's a lot of different ways that we've built out those lists of vendors. And now we have a really solid list that we are consistently working with. And so it's not like we're always open to new players in the industry, but we kind of have our core that we're really happy with.
Great. So why do you think is Blanka so successful?
Wow, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of reasons I think we've gotten to where we are today. And I think we'd have to kind of define what success is. And it's kind of a moving
Yeah.
target in a lot of ways. But I think the first kind of foundational reason why we've been successful is we are very values oriented. And so we make decisions based on our values, which plays into, integrity and high quality. And that's not just high quality in our products or in our tech, but also in the customer support that we offer. That makes a big difference. I'd say those pieces are really a big part of our success. The other pieces, I'd say we have like an incredible team. It's a very driven team, and everybody understands like what the goal is, how we're going to get there, and what they need to be doing. I don't think I know for certain, nobody's ever twiddling their thumbs, and there's always way more work than there's hours in the day, and people are super excited about what we're building. So I think, between our values and the piece of our values like product, tech, and customer support, and then our team really make up the success of our business.
Um, so I think one of the things that I wanted to ask is, how have you changed as a leader and evolved as a leader? Because you're talking about when you started off, it was just the three of you, and now it's a huge team.
Yeah.
So how have you evolved as a leader, and what has been your learning throughout this process?
This is a great question, and I think it's one that doesn't get asked enough because there's a lot of changes that are required as you go from 2 people to 10 to 20, right?
Yeah.
I think for me, having to move out of the weeds and move into more of a strategic role where you went from player to player coach, and now I'm more of a coach in a lot of ways. And so I think that transition has been really interesting, and I want to make sure I'm doing it properly, and I'm constantly thinking about that. I think the other piece that I've learned about myself that I think has been positive is I've learned how to let go a little bit more over the last few years and really trust the team.
That's hard.
And empower them. And it is hard, and give up certain areas of the business where I need to feel confident that, person X can handle it and own it and run with it. And so that's been a learning curve for me, but I think something that we've become really good at. So yeah, there's definitely been a lot of evolution. I've explored, if there's more business coaching that I can receive, more mentorship. We've been really fortunate with like the cap table and the investors we have. They act as mentors to me because otherwise it can get kind of lonely in the CEO role. But yeah, it's something that is constantly on my mind and something I'm constantly trying to improve is like, how to be better for the team. And I definitely haven't perfected it yet, but I'm trying.
What has been the biggest challenge in terms of being a leader?
I'd say at the same time, it's like team dynamic and making sure that, as you grow, everybody understands, what the goals are, what their roles are, what the opportunity for their role could be. And then there's always like people dynamics and hiring and all that stuff. I think I've had to learn a lot more there than I realized. And just, broadly speaking, I think at the end of the day, another big challenge is prioritization, always making sure we're working on the right things and making the right decision. Because as I alluded to earlier, the to-do list is way longer than the number of the hours in your day. So how do you make sure that the things you're choosing are the right needle movers? And so I'm constantly holding myself accountable to that, questioning that, but then also making sure the team's doing the same thing.
So do you think your workload has decreased or increased, or is just completely different from when you started? Because I think when you started, you were doing everything, like you and Adam and Doug, you guys were doing everything, but now it's like you have a team. But sort of, how has the workload increased or decreased? Are you able to take some time for yourself?
No, not at all. No, it's an insane workload. But that's what I signed up for. I love it. I don't want to be bored. And so I'm totally fine with that.
What were some of the mistakes that you did in the beginning, especially when you're bootstrapping? I think, like even for me, like deciding where to spend your money on, I think that's such a hard thing for founders. And I also saw when in your playbook for founders for fundraising, spending money for the pitch deck. So how do you kind of decide how much money to spend on? And like every dollar counts, right, at this point. So how did you decide, and how did you distribute the money?
Yeah, I mean, because we bootstrapped for so long, it forced us to be very capital efficient, which was an incredible thing. I think that that's one of our strengths is I'd fight every dollar and cent that went out the door to make sure that it was being used properly. And so I think in terms of like mistakes that we've made are less on like capital deployment and probably more on, I'd say, product in some ways. I think the like day one, I look back to like the original MVP that we had, and we could have peeled it back like 5 layers. And so I think founders tend to over engineer what an MVP truly is when they first launch like a beta, for example. And looking back, we probably could have simplified a lot more than what we launched with. That's one learning. Then beyond that, as we continue to build product, is I would have loved to have built out a product development lifecycle and process a lot sooner, because we were very wish-washy in terms of how we released product and how we did design, bug fixing, all that stuff. We are so good at it now, but it took us a very long time to get here. And then I think it's like the third's a broader one is like, if your numbers or if something feels off, there's a story to be told and you need to dig in, and hope can't be the strategy. I think there's a few times where we're like, this drop doesn't make sense, and we wouldn't really dig into it that much. We'll be like, oh, we'll see what the numbers are next month. And that's, in my opinion now, unacceptable. Like, we need to be operating in terms of like hours instead of weeks. And so I think just, digging into problems when they first occur, trusting your gut has been really important. And that speed to like reroute the ship if need be is super important. I think those have been big learnings for us, even in the last like year. And they've already monumentally changed the direction of the business.
How do you see yourself, like how do you see Blanka growing, and how do you see your role changing in the maybe next few years?
Oh my gosh, I have no idea. I'm very open to what that could look like. But at the end of the day, we built Blanka to be a platform where world-class brands can be built and scaled. And so I'm very excited to look forward even to 2025 to continue to build some really amazing brands, right? We work with existing D2C brands as they want to test out product development in beauty. We work with existing beauty professionals like med spas and salons to help them launch their own lines. And we work with creators and celebrities to help them launch their own beauty product lines as well. And so I'm just really excited about next year and helping more people launch their dream businesses.
What has been some of the inspiring stories and of founders that you've like interacted with through Blanka?
We have so many. One that comes to mind I love is somebody who was in university and lived a very active lifestyle. She was a cheerleader, a varsity cheerleader, was super involved in athletics, and coming out of university or college wanted to build out her own sweat-proof makeup. And she started as a one-person show with Blanka and built this line, and eventually grew it very significantly with a big team in a very short period of time. So I thought that was such a cool story. And, very common, we see a lot of stories like that in the platform. One that I didn't expect was a dad who reached out to me because he was building a business with his daughter, and he was using Blanka as a way to show his daughter the fundamentals about businesses and how to start a business. And they also built quite a successful brand through Blanka. And I just thought that was a bit of a different use case and not something we had seen before, but also a really cool story.
I think talking about that, like, has it been challenging being a female founder?
I've definitely had my fair share of like interesting comments from people or weird meetings with VCs. And sometimes it's hard for me to draw the divide of, figuring out, it's like, okay, was that conversation we were sent female, or because I'm in a very, what appears to be a female centric industry like beauty? if they don't want to touch a 480, $500 billion industry, like that's their problem. But for me, I've tried to kind of keep my head down and away from that and just focus on building. We have a female dominant team, female dominant customer base, and even our cap table is more majority female. And it's something that I'm really proud of.
That's amazing. And especially in, like you said, this market, it's really hard.
Yes, it can be.
So one of the things that I wanted to know is, how do you see the beauty industry changing? I know that when Blanka started, I think it was really, in terms of tech, beauty industry was really lacking. And I think I heard it from you. So how do you think, is it changing? What do you think is the biggest challenge in the beauty industry right now?
I definitely think it's evolving. I think what's really crazy is we see this industry at a macro level that is growing exponentially with massive revenues, market share through the roof. But when you kind of look under the hood, it's very archaic in terms of the way it operates. You know, the manufacturing and the chemists, and it's all very old school, and there's not a lot of tech behind the scenes. And so I think that there's a lot of consolidation and a lot of upgrading that will happen behind the scenes to enable, you know, product development and distribution and all those things. I also think, like, looking ahead in this industry, we're going to see a lot more focus on like niche brands, personalization, really focusing on the consumer. We've already seen a push towards that, where, you know, in the past it was all like you just go to your local drug mart or drugstore or department store to pick up a random product. It's not like that anymore. Now you have personalized colors or scents or textures. And so I'm excited about that wave. And I think it's something that we're playing into a lot as well. So that's how I think about the industry. I think this year is going to be really interesting. There's not a lot of flowing working capital in beauty. And so founders are going to have to get a lot more thoughtful about how they get to market. And like Blanka is a great option for that, right? With private label, we can also do custom formulation at really low cost. And so I'm excited for what 2025 has in store.
Yeah. Anyone who wants to start their own brand, what advice would you have? And I know Blanka is such a great tool. So what is the minimum capital anyone would require in terms of like just starting a beauty brand, and also an advice?
Yeah. So in terms of minimum capital, if you were to go and find a manufacturer, you would probably spend a lot of time sourcing through the 13,000 global manufacturers out there. And then you'd have to invest in sampling from all of that, invest in inventory, probably some sort of fulfillment space. You're looking at a few $1,000s investment. With Blanka, it's as seamless as creating a free account, browsing products, adding your logo, and selling them on an online store. So you'd probably have to spend about $30 a month with Shopify, for example, to sell on your online store. And with Blanka, you only pay Blanka when you sell a product. So for example, if I'm selling a mascara for $25, you're buying it from Blanka for, let's say, $9. And so the costs are a lot lower because there's no minimums and it's all through a streamlined tech platform. And so that's my pitch on Blanka. To me, it's a no-brainer, obviously. And in terms of advice I'd give to a founder, it's the first thing is know why you're building your brand. What's that brand story? Whether it's, you know, the sweat-proof makeup, or it's a skincare line for an older generation. Start small. You don't need 20 SKUs. 3 SKUs to build a really strong narrative is good enough. And the third is like grind it out. You're not going to get customers just by throwing a bunch of paid ads out there. You need to build community. You need to go to the farmer's market. You maybe already have an audience on your Instagram, so you need to promote there. Those are kind of the big kind of pieces of advice that I would give.
Do you think it's easier now because of all the resources that we have, or it's harder
to start a brand?
Yeah, start a brand.
I think it's easier to, you know, probably get all the nuts and bolts set up in terms of sourcing. Blanka makes it easier, right? I think there's more challenges in terms of cutting through the noise, right? There's so much more competition in ad spend and on different marketplaces. And so you really need to figure out, again, what your narrative is in your niche. And so I think different areas of the value chain have different challenges.
Okay, thank you so much. Before you go, can you give your favorite quote and a book that changed your life?
Absolutely. Okay, I'd have to report back on what's my favorite quote? What do I always say? There's so many. Um, I think one of mine is like under promise and over deliver. I would much rather
That's
somebody
good.
under promise something and over deliver to the moon. In terms of a few books that I love, Good to Great by Jim Collins is an absolute OG book that everyone should read about building really great teams. I also really liked it's called a Ride of a Lifetime, Road of a Lifetime, Ride of a Lifetime, by Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, and his kind of coming up through Disney. They're both very much like leadership books on how to build great teams, and I think they're really fantastic books. So check them out.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Kaylee.
Thank you so much. It was so great to chat.
That was Kaylee. What stands out to me about Kaylee is the scale of her impact. Kaylee's journey building Blanka, supporting tens of thousands of entrepreneurs, and doing it while navigating real life transition is a reminder that leadership isn't just about growth metrics or visibility. It's about responsibility, decision making, and the impact you have on people you may never meet. What I appreciate most about Kaylee is how intentional she is about what she's building and why it matters. Blanka isn't just a company, it's an infrastructure that's opened doors for founders who didn't have access before. If this episode gave you perspective, whether you're building a company, navigating a transition, or thinking more deeply about your own path, I hope you take something from this. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. I promise I will continue to show up with conversations that respect your time and add value to your life. I'll see you next time. Until then, be bold, be real, and be anomalous.